It is now officially confirmed that Imeth is going to be getting access to Fusion Burst. However, despite you thinking that this is going to make Chisa a good character for her, think again. Because in this video, I'm going to explain why Chisa is still not going to be a good character for Imeth. And it all comes down to one big factor really, being the separation between Toon Rupture and Fusion Burst. Just like Lene, Imeth is going to have access to something called Resonance Mode, where in her Forte screen, she's able to change to either Toon Rupture or to Fusion Burst, meaning that these two archetypes are going to be entirely separate from each other and you are not going to be able to mix and match its teammates. This immediately calls into question one of the most popular ideas people had, being the fact that they could possibly run Imeth with Lene and Chisa. However, because Toon Rupture and Fusion Burst are two entirely separate things within Imeth's kit that she's not going to be able to access at the same time, this is going to be an incredibly questionable team comp. This is like trying to run DPS Phoebe in Confession mode or trying to run a support Phoebe in Absolution mode. It just doesn't work because the kit doesn't allow for it. You simply cannot do two things at the same time. However, I can already hear what people are going to say in the comments section. Lene is more than just her Toon Rupture synergy, which is very true. Lene absolutely is way more than just her synergy with Toon Rupture. She's also a massive stat buffer. But for Fusion Burst Imeth, stat buffing is not going to be that relevant, and here's why. Unlike with previous negative status DPSs like Zani and Cardathea, Fusion Burst Imeth is going to be able to get most of her damage out of the Fusion Burst itself. She's going to be the first negative status DPS who actively wants to deal damage through negative status. This means that her own stats are a lot less important, and what you're really wanting to look at is negative status amplification and negative status buffing. I can tell from her Forte circuit basically entirely buffing Fusion Burst itself and nothing else. This means that the stats that Lene is going to give to Imeth are going to be a lot less utilized than they would be in the Toon Break team. Another big thing is that one of the strongest things that Lene has access to is Toon Rupture. It makes up almost half of her damage profile, and if you're not running Mornia, you're simply going to be triggering it a lot less often. This means that Lene is simply being utilized a lot less within the Fusion Burst team. Because of the larger focus on the damage of Fusion Burst itself, we're most likely going to have to wait until we get a Fusion Burst focused sub DPS in order to actually use the Fusion Burst mode. We already have some evidence of one coming soon because of the Chromatic Foam set, but first I want to talk about why I believe that this Fusion Burst sub DPS is going to be absolutely needed. First of all, Kuro Games is most likely going to want to design these two modes around being equal in power, or at least being used in different scenarios, and thus, they can't make one of them way more powerful than the other one. If the Fusion Burst mode would already be competitive with Toon Rupture, despite Toon Rupture already having the full team, that would just mean that the Fusion Burst mode is going to be way stronger once we get its full team. Because, most likely, this Fusion Burst sub DPS is going to fall into the same trend as Phoebe and Chikona, being the 100% damage amplification on the Ultra skill. This will double the damage of Fusion Burst, because all of the buffs Imeth gives to it are multiplier increases and not any sort of amplification. Chisa's stat cap increase is also entirely independent from amplification, which means that 100% damage amplification will basically double the damage of Fusion Burst. And because it's going to be the majority of the team's damage output, doubling this damage is going to be absolutely disgusting, and is going to be a massive power increase for the Fusion Burst Imeth team. This means that on release, Fusion Burst Imeth is simply going to be a lot weaker than Toon Rupture Imeth. This is guaranteed in my mind, because if the Fusion Burst team is at all competitive with Toon Rupture, all hell is going to break loose the second that we get that sub DPS. This sub DPS is also most likely going to be applying a ton of Fusion Burst, because Imeth Fusion Trail requires Fusion Burst application to stack up. So obviously we're gonna need a character that applies a ton of Fusion Burst so that Imeth can properly stack up her Fusion Trail. which means that at the end of the day, this Fusion Burst sub DPS is still going to be more vital than the Fusion Burst team than Chisa is going to be. Chisa's stack cap increase does basically double the damage of Fusion Burst, but the Fusion Burst sub DPS will also do this while also stacking Fusion Trail up more than Chisa ever could. So even in the one team where Chisa is going to be vital to making the team actually strong, she's still going to be the lowest value character when it comes to the context of that team, easily being replaceable by any other character who will be able to increase Fusion Burst stack cap by 3, and if they have any sort of additional buff towards Fusion Burst, they're most likely simply going to be stronger than Chisa herself. This is what really highlights Chisa's issue to me. She isn't designed to be best for any team, rather being a complete band-aid for every single negative status team. She doesn't interact with the negative statuses other than simply increasing their cap. And that is why in every single negative status team, she is going to be the lowest value character. And if she ever has any real value in one of these teams, it's purely because there's no other option. However, Imeth is going to be very different, because remember, she still has her entire Toon Rupture team. Imeth has a reason to run literally anything else, because she's literally designed to have 2 separate teams. So ultimately, even though Chisa is finally getting another team where she's actually the best in slot, it's still not really a good reason to pull for a Chisa. If you already have Chisa, it's going to be a good use case for her, but if you don't have Chisa, you shouldn't feel pressured to pull for her just because Imeth is going to have Fusion Burst within her kit. Considering Toon Rupture's issues with multi-wave content, I believe that Toon Rupture is going to be the bossing mode, and when you're running Fusion Burst it's mainly for multi-wave. But 2 out of 3 of the endgames are centered around bosses. Meanwhile, we only have one endgame that's focused around multi-wave. So even when we're looking at all of the endgame content, the Toon Rupture team is still going to be a lot more value. The Toon Rupture characters are also simply a lot more universal than the Fusion Burst characters ever could be, because negative status is an island. If someone releases a negative status character, they are very rarely going to have any sort of use case outside of negative status. Meanwhile, Lene and Mornya are the most powerful wheelchair composition in the game, being able to run with nearly every single DPS, making them way higher value characters. Now you are able to spin this in Chisa's favor, saying that Imeth's negative status team does allow you to free up characters like Lene and Mornya. This is very true. However, the Imeth negative status team is going to be a very expensive one in its own right, because if you run an Imeth negative status team, you have to pull for Chisa and its sub DPS. But why pull for those 2 characters when you could just pull for a new healer and a new sub DPS for the team you were originally going to run Lene and Mornya in? Again, like I said earlier, Imeth isn't making Chisa a good pull. She's simply adding some value to Chisa if you already have her. But if you don't have Chisa yet, you shouldn't be pulling her simply because of Imeth's Fusion Burst team. Chisa is simply a band-aid, allowing Kuro Games to start working on other negative statuses without having to create a full team at one specific time. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, and while you're down there, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, be sure to join my Discord, which is linked in the description. And if you just want to see more of me, you can check out my second channel, which is also linked in the description. But that'll be all from me. Peace.